The old man sat in his worn leather chair, watching his daughter-in-law pace around the living room like a caged animal. She had been doing this for weeks now, ever since the baby arrived. Something was wrong, but she wouldn't say what. "Just tell me the name," the old man said, his voice rough from decades of cigarettes he'd finally quit too late. "How hard can it be?" The young mother stopped pacing. Her hands shook as she clutched the birth certificate. I can't. Not yet." The old man's son, her husband, sat on the couch staring at his phone. He hadn't looked up in 20 minutes. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. "We've been calling her baby for 3 weeks." The old man continued. "The neighbors are starting to talk. Your own mother won't visit. What's going on?" The young mother finally sat down, tears streaming down her face. "I named her Gwen. Gwen Elizabeth Morrison. I've loved that name since I was 12 years old. But..." She couldn't finish the sentence. The old man leaned forward. "But what?" "Everyone reacts like I've cursed her," she whispered. "Like I've done something terrible." The old man frowned. He'd been around long enough to know when people were hiding something important. "What aren't you telling me?" The husband finally looked up from his phone. "Dad, maybe you should just leave this alone." "Like hell I will," the old man snapped. "That's my granddaughter lying upstairs, and she doesn't even have a proper name yet. I want answers." The young mother pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. 3 years ago," she said quietly, "a woman named Gwen Elizabeth Morrison killed 2 children in a drunk driving accident. She lived in our neighborhood. She worked at my husband's company." The old man felt the blood drain from his face. "I didn't know," the young mother continued. "I'd been dreaming of this name my whole life. We went through years of fertility treatments. I had 3 miscarriages. When I finally got pregnant, I was so happy. I thought everything was perfect." The old man stared at her. "And now? Now I have to choose between the name I've loved forever and protecting my daughter from being associated with a child killer for the rest of her life." The old man couldn't sleep that night. He sat by his bedroom window, looking out at the neighborhood where his granddaughter would grow up. Every house held families who would remember that name, that crime. He'd seen enough in his 82 years to know that some stains never wash out. The next morning, he found his daughter-in-law feeding the baby in the kitchen. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "You can't use that name," he said without preamble. She looked up, startled. "What?" "I said you can't use it. I know you don't want to hear it. But I'm old enough to tell you the truth without sugarcoating it." The young mother's eyes flashed with anger. "You don't understand. This isn't just a name to me. It's everything I dreamed of when I thought I might never have children." "Dreams don't matter when they hurt your child," the old man said bluntly. "That little girl will carry whatever name you give her for the rest of her life. You want her first day of school to be teachers whispering about a killer? You want her job interviews to start with uncomfortable silences? It's not fair," she said, her voice breaking. "Fair?" The old man laughed bitterly. "Nothing's fair. I buried my wife when she was 53. My son over there can barely look at his own daughter because he's so ashamed of what his coworkers will think. Life isn't fair, but we protect our children anyway." The husband appeared in the doorway. "Dad, that's enough." "No, it's not enough," the old man shot back. "Your wife is clinging to a fantasy while your daughter suffers. Someone needs to be the adult here." The young mother stood up abruptly, the baby still in her arms. "You think I'm being selfish?" "I think you're being human," the old man said. "But human isn't always what our children need." The old man decided to take matters into his own hands. While his son was at work and his daughter-in-law was napping, he walked to the neighborhood grocery store. Mrs. Patterson, who'd lived on their street for 40 years, was buying vegetables. The old man approached her directly. "Mary," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." She looked up, wary. Everyone in the neighborhood knew about the baby name situation by now. If a child moved in next door with the name Gwen Morrison, what would you think? Mrs. Patterson's face went pale. "Oh, Frank, no. Please tell me they're not seriously considering. Just answer the question." She set down her shopping basket. "I'd think about those 2 children who died. Emma was 7, Jake was 5. I'd remember their mother screaming at the trial. I'd remember how that drunk woman showed no remorse, how she blamed everyone but herself." The old man nodded grimly. "And if that child grew up here?" "It would follow her forever," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "People don't forget something like that, especially not in a town this size. It wouldn't be her fault, but she'd pay for it anyway." Mrs. Patterson nodded. "I'm sorry, Frank. I know this isn't what your family wants to hear." The old man thanked her and left. He had 4 more conversations that afternoon. Each one confirmed what he already knew. That evening, the old man gathered his son and daughter-in-law in the living room. He'd prepared a list. "I talked to 5 neighbors today," he announced. "Every single one of them remembered the case immediately when I mentioned the name. They all said the same thing: it would follow the child forever." The young mother's face crumpled. "You had no right to do that." "I had every right," the old man said firmly. "That's my granddaughter up there, and I won't watch her life get ruined because you can't let go of a childhood dream." The husband looked between them. "Dad, maybe there's another way." "There's no other way," the old man interrupted. Names have power. This one has the wrong kind of power. The young mother stood up, shaking with rage. You don't know what it's like. You don't know what it feels like to want something your whole life and then have to give it up. The old man's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. You're right. I don't know what it's like to carry a baby for 9 months. But I know what it's like to make hard choices to protect your children. I know what it's like to put their needs before your wants. This isn't want, she said desperately. This name is part of who I am. Then you need to figure out who you are without it, the old man said bluntly, because right now, you're choosing a name over your daughter's future. The room fell silent. The baby started crying upstairs. Unable to sleep again, the old man spent the night researching the case online. What he found was worse than he'd expected. Gwen Elizabeth Morrison had been driving drunk at 3 times the legal limit when she hit 2 children playing in their front yard. She'd shown up to court drunk. She'd laughed during victim impact statements. The community's hatred for her had been absolute and enduring, but there was more. The old man discovered that Gwen Morrison had been released from prison just 6 months ago. She was living 2 towns over, still unrepentant, still drinking according to local news reports. The name wasn't just associated with past tragedy, it was connected to ongoing local trauma. The next morning, he printed out the articles and placed them on the kitchen table. When his daughter-in-law came down for breakfast, she saw the papers and froze. Read them, the old man said quietly. She shook her head. I can't. You have to. You need to understand what you're asking your daughter to carry. With trembling hands, she picked up the first article. As she read, her face went white, then green. She ran to the bathroom and threw up. When she returned, the old man was still sitting at the table. The woman who killed those children is still alive, he said, still in the area, still making news for drunk driving arrests. That's not ancient history, that's current reality. The young mother sank into a chair. I didn't know. Now you do. The young mother disappeared into her room for the rest of the day. The old man could hear her crying through the walls. His son paced around the house like a ghost, unable to comfort either his wife or his father. That evening, she emerged with red, swollen eyes. What if we spell it differently? She asked desperately. Gwyn instead of Gwen. The old man shook his head. It's the same name. People will make the connection. What about a different middle name? Still the same first and last name combination. She sat down heavily. There has to be something. The old man looked at his granddaughter, sleeping peacefully in her carrier. The only something is giving her a different name entirely. I can't, she whispered. It's like asking me to cut off my arm. Then maybe you need to lose that arm to save your child, the old man said without flinching. His son finally spoke up. Dad, that's harsh. Life is harsh, the old man replied. I'm not here to make anyone feel better. I'm here to protect my granddaughter. The next week brought a new problem. Someone had started a social media thread about the baby name situation. The old man's daughter-in-law showed him the screen, her hands shaking. Look what they're saying about us, she whispered. The old man read through the comments. They ranged from supportive to vicious, but the overwhelming consensus was clear. Using that name would be a betrayal of the victims' families and the community. How did this get out? He asked. I don't know. Maybe someone overheard us at the doctor's office, or... The old man scrolled through more comments. Several were from parents who knew the murdered children. Their words were raw with pain and anger. These people lost their babies, the old man said quietly, and you want to name your baby after the woman who killed them. I'm not naming her after the killer, the young mother protested. I chose this name when I was 12, long before that woman existed in my life. But that's not how the world sees it, the old man said, and the world is where your daughter has to live. The old man did something his family would probably never forgive him for. He looked up the contact information for the families of the murdered children and made a phone call. Emma's mother answered on the 3rd ring. Mrs. Chen, the old man said. My name is Frank Morrison. I'm calling about my granddaughter. There was silence on the other end. I understand there's been some talk about her name, he continued. Are you seriously going to name that baby after the woman who killed my daughter? Mrs. Chen's voice was barely controlled fury. That's what I'm calling to prevent, the old man said. I need you to help me understand what this would mean to your family. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice broken. Emma would be 10 years old now. She'd be in 4th grade. She loved to draw and wanted to be an artist. Every time I hear that name, Gwen Morrison, I see my daughter's body on the pavement. I see that woman laughing in court while I cried over my child's coffin. The old man closed his eyes. I'm sorry for your loss. If you name that baby Gwen Morrison, every time anyone says her name in this community, we'll remember our dead children. Is that really what you want for your granddaughter? To be a walking reminder of the worst day of our lives? The old man thanked her and hung up. He sat in silence for a long time. When his daughter-in-law came home from grocery shopping, the old man was waiting for her. I talked to Emma Chen's mother today, he said. She dropped her grocery bags. You what? I called her. I asked her what it would mean to their family if we used that name. The young mother's face went through several emotions: shock, anger, betrayal, and finally resignation. What did she say? The old man repeated the conversation word for word. By the end, his daughter-in-law was crying again. "That's not fair," she said. "I didn't kill those children." "No, you didn't, but you're about to name your daughter after the woman who did." "I'm not naming her after the killer," she screamed. "When will you understand that?" The old man's voice remained steady. "It doesn't matter what you intend. It only matters what people understand. And they understand that a baby named Gwen Morrison is connected to a child killer named Gwen Morrison." The young mother sank into a chair. "So I just have to give up everything I ever dreamed of?" "You have to choose," the old man said. "Your dream or your daughter's life." The old man's son had been silent through most of these confrontations, but that night he finally exploded. "Enough!" he shouted, startling both the baby and his wife. "I can't take this anymore!" He turned to his wife. "You're destroying our family over a name. A name. Look at yourself. You haven't bonded with our daughter because you're so obsessed with this." Then he turned to his father. "And you, calling the victims' families? What were you thinking? You've made this 10 times worse." The old man stood his ground. Someone had to face reality. "Reality?" His son laughed bitterly. "Reality is that I can't even go to work anymore without people staring at me. Reality is that my wife is having a mental breakdown. Reality is that my daughter doesn't have a name because her mother is too stubborn to accept that sometimes dreams have to die." The young mother looked at her husband with wide, hurt eyes. "You think I should just give up?" "I think you should grow up," he said harshly. "I think you should put our daughter first instead of your childhood fantasies." Left alone while her husband and father-in-law were at work, the young mother finally did her own research. She read every article about the case, watched news footage from the trial, found social media posts from the victims' families. What she discovered broke something inside her. The killer, Gwen Morrison, had not been a one-time offender. She'd had multiple DUI arrests before the fatal crash. She'd been warned by judges, by family, by friends. She'd laughed it off every time. During the trial, she'd shown no remorse. She'd claimed the children came out of nowhere, even though they were playing in their own front yard in broad daylight. She'd blamed their parents for not watching them closely enough. In prison interviews, she'd complained about the food, the other inmates, the unfairness of her sentence. She'd never once mentioned the children she'd killed. Since her release, she'd been arrested twice more for drunk driving. The young mother sat in her living room, staring at the sleeping baby, and finally understood what everyone had been trying to tell her. That evening, when the old man and his son returned home, they found the young mother sitting at the kitchen table with a pen and paper. "I've been thinking," she said quietly. The old man sat down across from her. His son remained standing, wary. "The name Gwen Morrison belongs to a monster," she continued. "I can't give it to my daughter, no matter how much I love it." The old man felt relief wash over him, but he kept his expression neutral. "But," she continued, "I can't just throw away everything I dreamed of either." She pushed the paper across the table. On it, she'd written several names. Gwyneth Morrison. Guinevere Morrison. Gwendolyn Morrison. "They're all related to Gwen," she explained. "But they're not the same name. People won't make the immediate connection." The old man studied the list. "Gwyneth is close to Gwen. But it's not Gwen," she said firmly. "It's different enough that she won't carry that woman's legacy, but close enough that I'm not completely giving up my dream." The old man's son looked at the list over his father's shoulder. "What would we call her day to day?" "Gwyn," the young mother said, "with a E, or Gwyneth, never Gwen." Before making the final decision, the old man suggested they test the community's reaction. He asked his daughter-in-law to mention the name Gwyneth Morrison to a few people and see how they responded. The results were telling. Most people didn't make the immediate connection to the killer. A few asked if it was related to that woman, but when told it was spelled and pronounced differently, they seemed satisfied. Mrs. Patterson from down the street was the most direct. "It's not the same name, Frank. Close, but not the same. I think the baby will be fine with that one." The young mother also called the pediatrician's office to change the name on their records. The receptionist didn't even blink at Gwyneth Morrison. "It feels different," the young mother told the old man that evening. "When people say, Gwyneth, I don't see that woman's face. I see my daughter." 3 weeks after discovering the name conflict, the family finally made it official. The birth certificate was amended to read, Gwyneth Elizabeth Morrison. The young mother held the new document with shaking hands. "It's done," she whispered. The old man watched as she looked at the baby, really looked at her, without the shadow of that other name hanging over them. "Hello, Gwyneth," she said softly. The baby opened her eyes and seemed to focus on her mother's face for the first time. The old man felt his son's hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Dad," his son said quietly. "I know that wasn't easy for any of us." The old man nodded. Sometimes being family means making the hard choices. A week after the name change, something unexpected happened. The old man's daughter-in-law seemed to finally bond with the baby in a way she hadn't before. "It's strange," she told him one afternoon while nursing Gwyneth. When I was calling her Gwen, even in my mind, I felt like I was fighting for something, like I was defending her name instead of just loving her. The old man sat down in the chair next to her. And now? Now she's just my daughter, Gwyneth. Not a symbol of my dreams or a battleground for my stubbornness, just my baby. She looked up at him. I was so angry at you for pushing this, but you were right. I was choosing my feelings over her future. The old man reached out and touched the baby's tiny hand. It wasn't about being right, it was about protecting her. As word spread about the name change, the social media criticism died down. The neighbors started visiting again. The young mother was able to take Gwyneth to the park without whispered conversations following them. Most importantly, the victims' families seemed to find some peace in the decision. Mrs. Chen called the old man directly. "Thank you," she said simply. "I know it wasn't easy for your family, but it means everything to us that you listened." The old man accepted her thanks, but privately he wondered if they'd waited too long to make the change. The first few weeks of a baby's life were crucial for bonding, and they'd lost that time to a name conflict. Still, he watched his daughter-in-law with Gwyneth and saw a contentment that hadn't been there before. Months later, as Gwyneth grew from a tiny infant into a more alert baby, the family reflected on what they'd been through. The old man's son brought it up one evening while they were watching Gwyneth play on a blanket. "I keep thinking about how close we came to ruining her life before it even started," he said. The old man nodded. Names have more power than people realize. They shape how the world sees you, how you see yourself. The young mother looked up from where she was playing with Gwyneth. "I used to think it was shallow to change a name because of what other people might think. But it's not about being shallow, it's about understanding reality. Reality is that we don't live in a vacuum," the old man agreed. "Our choices affect other people, and other people's reactions affect us. Pretending otherwise is naive." Gwyneth grabbed at a colorful toy, babbling happily. She had no idea how close she'd come to carrying a burden that wasn't hers to bear. As Gwyneth's first birthday approached, the family had settled into their new normal. The name controversy felt like ancient history, something they'd all learned from and moved past. The old man watched his granddaughter take her first steps and felt a deep satisfaction. She was walking into her future unburdened by someone else's crimes, free to make her own mark on the world. The young mother had started a blog about her experience, helping other parents who found themselves in similar situations. She'd received dozens of messages from people who discovered their chosen names had problematic associations. "You were the first person to tell me the truth," she wrote to the old man in a letter she never sent but kept in her diary. "Everyone else wanted to protect my feelings, but you protected my daughter instead." That's what grandparents are supposed to do. Years later, when Gwyneth was old enough to understand, her mother told her the story of her name. Not the full harsh truth, but a simplified version about how sometimes we have to change our plans to protect the people we love. Gwyneth, now a bright 7-year-old, listened carefully. "So you wanted to name me Gwen, but you chose Gwyneth instead?" she asked. "That's right," her mother said, "because Gwyneth is who you were meant to be." The old man, now nearing 90 but still sharp, watched this conversation from his chair by the window. Later, when Gwyneth was playing outside, she approached him. "Great, Grandpa," she said. "Mama told me about my name." "What did you think about that?" he asked. Gwyneth considered this seriously, as she did most things. "I think you were brave," she said finally. "It must have been hard to make Mama sad, but you did it anyway to keep me safe." The old man felt tears prick his eyes. Sometimes love means making hard choices. "I know," Gwyneth said solemnly. "When I have children, I'll remember that." She ran back to her play, leaving the old man to contemplate the strange turns life could take. A name chosen in childhood innocence had nearly become a curse. A family's stubborn love had nearly become a burden. But in the end, wisdom had prevailed over sentiment, and a child had been protected from carrying someone else's sins. The old man looked out at the neighborhood where his great-granddaughter would grow up. It was the same neighborhood where 2 other children had once played, where their lives had been cut short by a woman whose name would forever be associated with tragedy. But Gwyneth Morrison would write her own story. She would carry her own name into the future, unburdened by the past, free to become whoever she chose to be. Sometimes, the old man thought, the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go of what we want most. In the distance, he could hear Gwyneth's laughter mixing with the sounds of other children playing. It was the sound of innocence preserved, of potential protected, of a future uncompromised by the past. The weight of names, the old man knew, was not something to take lightly. But when carried by the right person, even the heaviest name could become something beautiful. Gwyneth Morrison would be just fine.